The first time we met was at Aspen, where Carlisle had studied piano in the seasons before with Rudolf Verkushny. And I simply was at Aspen, and I had a phone call, and there was Carlisle Floyd, and he said that he had heard that I did a lot of new music, and he had written this opera, and could he bring it and show it to me? And I said, please do, because you'll have to help. I have been singing so much new music all summer, I have no discretion left. And so he came to my house, and we read through all of Susannah. And it just was right there, as normal as could be to me, the show, the person, the everything. And so I called Mac Harrell, who was there, and said, Mac, this has happened. Can we come and play it to you? And by the time the afternoon was over, Mac and I both fell in love with this piece. Carlisle called his dean back at Florida State University and said that we had enjoyed this piece. And his dean said, well, if you can get them to sing it, we'll give you a performance. And that's how we all met. We did Susannah first in Tallahassee. Then when Mac and I went back to New York, we decided to sing it for a few people. One person who ran a wonderful opera enterprise said, but Phyllis, there's no boy meets girl in this piece. That took care of that one. But eventually we sang it to Erich Lansdorf, who lived near to Mac. And he liked it a lot, and that's how it got to the City Opera. And because for one season, Mr. Lansdorf ran City Opera. And so that's how we got to City Opera. However, Mac was in Europe and couldn't do it, and that's when Norman Tragle came in. And that's how we got started with Susannah. We sang in a lot of places, did he tell you, even Brussels, in the World's Fair. Yeah. Oh, it was very easily accepted. It's not a difficult thing to grasp in any way at all. It's all right there. I mean, it's really, I would say, exemplifies what real opera is. You realize the story, everybody is there in the music. It's a remarkable coming together of people and music. And there's nothing in it that is off-putting in this day and age when people like to say about contemporary music all the curious things they do. But it's an easy piece. And I don't mean to suggest that there's anything ordinary about it, but it's available and passionately so in the music for every stretch of the way. So I don't think there was ever an audience that didn't react to this nicely. We were in a curious period with composition about that time. Carlisle's opera was largely being called by all kinds of people a folk opera. Now, why a folk opera? That text, that story, the center of it, fits any number of societies in any number of ways. And so that sometimes, to me, seemed to me sort of typical American Northeast and the South. Carlisle was a Southerner. Most of the composers and all that I knew were sort of Northeast. It was as if this was just somehow not in the same culture at all. It was a very peculiar attitude, but it struck very much to home a lot of the time. Well, it was sort of dismissed because it was a folk opera. Well, it's not a folk opera any more than Cavalleria Rusticana is a folk opera, or Peter Grimes, for heaven's sake. So that was annoyance to me. It also didn't fit, I suppose, into a lot of, as I say, a lot of contemporary style of composing at that point. It was a little in other kinds of music that I did, whether it was chamber music or song stuff. There were the far-out ones, and there were the neo-romantic ones, and it was like a civil war. If you sang this, you couldn't do that, and there was a big divide there. And that affected it to a degree, though when you think about one of the few others that was going around, there was a Ballad of Baby Doe, and there was hardly anything peculiar or strange or far out about that. But I was not seeing, nor was anybody, much contemporary American opera. So it came along, but it's been fascinating. It's never stopped being played. Well, it was as easy as could be. Sometimes people have asked to come and coach it with me, and I say there's no reason to do that. It's all right there. If you read the story, if you hear the music fits her every inch of the way, and all you have to do is listen. And she emerges easily from there. You would ask if Carlisle helped me, your word was build the role. And I thought, I never thought about building a role in my whole life. But she is just there. And I understood her, moved into her so easily. Now, it may be that that's a part of the world that I grew up in myself. I was born in West Virginia, raised there, not so far away from that whole area of the Appalachian region and all the rest. But she's just as true as can be all the way through. There's nothing mysterious to look for. It's so genuine, so absolutely right on as a person that you don't have to search around for anything, but you have to make her Susannah. I would say the two arias, I never even consider them arias. Ain't It a Pretty Night is perhaps one of the most natural expressions of anything that I ever sang. I just sat down on the porch and Ain't It a Pretty Night, and it just goes on from there. It is as genuine and as real for anybody in the world, I think. And then the other one, I sing it to myself when I'm sad and lonely. It says just that. And it hits a particular emotional depth in a way that we all recognize that is going on, but we have something else that helps it go that is quite different. And that song is a little that way. And I remember particularly at City Opera, there was a memorial evening for Norman Traegle after he had died. And Mr. Rudell asked if I'd sing Ain't It a Pretty Night, and I said no, I would rather sing the other one, The Trees on the Mountain, because of the many, many times we did that opera together. He's always in the background when she sings it, if you remember that. And that's a right sad song, Susannah, don't look as if it'd do you much good. So that night, I sang that. And I sang it to Norman. It still gets me. So that's the reality of those. Well, I will give you a little funny example, which is not like that, when we did it in Brussels. My husband had a friend, a correspondent in Europe, and she came with a friend of hers who was a correspondent from Moscow. And he had had some trouble before and was being very careful about what he did and said once out of Russia. But he did come backstage, and he did say to me, and then he vanished almost immediately and nobody saw him again, that this was the kind of thing he wished we could show in Moscow because it certainly exists there. Now we're talking then about the Soviet Union. And the crux of the story hit him right in the middle about that. So I don't know. I mean, it's very interesting. Something about the story itself and the business of revivals and all of that. Well, that was a big part of American life. It was when I was growing up. They went on in my hometown a lot. And so I understood that culture, but that's not the point of the story. So I can't answer that question about what makes an American composer, and I'm more baffled by it all the time. Wuthering Heights came about in a very nice way. Carlisle and I had become really very fast friends. And one day I was working on something or another, and I thought, well, now Mozart wrote all those concert arias for various ladies who were singing. So I wrote to Carlisle, and I said, I want a concert aria. I was about to do a second town hall recital, and I thought it would be fun to have a concert aria. And so he said, sure, he'd do that. And when it came, it was that section out of Wuthering Heights where Kathy says to Nellie, Nellie, have you never had strange dreams? And then she goes on in the course of this to tell her why she's decided to marry Edgar Linton. But it winds up, but Heathcliff is more myself than I am, and no more like Edgar Linton than fire from ice. And so he delivered my aria to me, and I sang it in my recital, and there were various opera people at that recital, and one of them happened to be John Crosby. But a number of people said, how's the rest of the opera? And I said, there is no opera, it's just my piece. But Crosby did then commission Wuthering Heights for Santa Fe. And Carlisle has my aria right there in the second act. And that's how that came about. And that's how I got asked to sing it. Carlisle and I never worked at it much. There really hasn't seemed to be a need to. We have understood each other, I think, remarkably well. I don't remember, of course, all of this is a long time ago. I don't remember any time when we had any disagreement about a single solitary thing. And in Wuthering Heights, there was only one place I was trying to think about that early this morning. Celia is a very normal lady, which is the only thing that makes it a little hard sometimes to play somebody who has no neuroses. And there was one little stretch that seemed to me about a third in the music too high. It made her, for her character, to me, seem a little on the strident side. And just after reading it through once, I felt that way, and I mentioned it to Carlisle, and he said, that's true. You know, when I hear it in my head, I hear it lower. So he rewrote that. And as far as I can tell you, in any of those pieces, that's the only thing that ever came up at all. And we have always found absolute unanimity in what we were doing in any of those things together, which is marvelous. Well, I think, as should happen to all artists, we grow, we change, and in, I hope, a lot of respects, we get richer all the time in what we have. Now, there's a lot of Carlisle I haven't heard now. I haven't heard the recent operas. He sent me a tape of Cold Sassy Tree, so I've heard it, but I've never seen it. And actually, I've only heard of Mice and Men and never seen it. But I would say that what has happened would seem to me to be a rather rich thing in the development of any major composer, and that is that his vocabulary gets wider. The musical language that he has become more varied, more interesting, and that happens. I mean, it happened to everybody I can think of who's really hung on as a really important composer. And his language has changed a great deal. And it's all been very interesting to me. It also so sort of Pollyanna for me, I'm afraid. We never had anything that I can remember except of sheer delight in doing whatever it was we did. When he would come and be with us and stay with us, and we would rehearse at the piano and all, we just found an exhilaration in doing what we did together. And that's a very positive and wonderful thing. Things go much faster that way. But I don't remember, as I say, any time when we had any kind of a disagreement or I really don't like that or couldn't we do this way, I seem to simply fall into his music very easily. I guess I'd put it that way. And apparently, I fell on the right side because I don't recall his fussing at me about anything. But we just had a good time. You found out what an enjoyable guy he is, how easy to get on with, and we just had a wonderful time together. He and my husband and his wife Kay, we had a lovely, lovely time. And when we made music together, it was, I could put it in one word, the most natural thing we did. His music and my singing it, I guess, which is wonderful.